Chapter 7. Midnight Kissing Practice. After 3 weeks of their unexpected break, C7's dorm had transformed from a place of brief rest between schedules into a strategic headquarters for Operation Courtship. The living room whiteboard, always reserved for comeback preparation notes, now displays a complex diagram of each member's dating progress, complete with color-coded indicators for promising development, needs intervention, and potential disaster. Tonight, the 7 members were gathered in various states of exhaustion and anxiety for what John had officially termed as their weekly relationship assessment and strategic planning session, but which everyone else referred to as dating therapy circle. "Let's begin with status reports," Roman suggested, glancing at his tablet where he had created a spreadsheet to track their Cupid endeavors. "Jake, you're up first." Jake, sprawled across the floor with his camera equipment surrounding him like a protective barrier, groaned. "No progress. Tina still treats me like a student, not a potential date. She corrects my dance technique, but won't acknowledge our moment at Madison Square Garden." "Which may or may not have happened," Silas pointed out dryly from his position on the couch, headphones hanging around his neck. "It happened," Jake insisted for what felt like the 100th time. "We had a connection. She won't admit it." "Perhaps a different approach is needed," Vic suggested, carefully arranging small flowers in a pattern that made sense only to him. "Your current strategy of intense observation and technical perfection isn't yielding results. What do you suggest?" "I've tried everything," Jake lamented. "I attend every class, I perfect every movement, I film her choreography with her permission now." "That's the minimum for not being creepy," James interrupted. "Not exactly a dating strategy." "What about showing her your choreography?" Vic suggested quietly. "Not C7's performances, but something personal. Your private work." Jake stilled, looking alarmed. "My experimental pieces? Those are just for me. I've never shown anyone." "Your improvisations," Vic nodded. "Connection requires vulnerability. Your idle dancing reveals technical mastery, but conceals your artistic soul." The room fell silent as the members reflected on this uncharacteristically direct insight from their most enigmatic member. "That's profound," Roman admitted, looking impressed. "Vic's right," John agreed. "We're all hiding behind our stage personas to some degree. Intimate connection requires showing parts of ourselves we usually keep hidden." Jake fiddled with his camera lens, clearly uncomfortable with the suggestion. "But my improvised choreography is weird. Experimental. Not crowd-pleasing like our performances." "That's the point," Vic said. "It's you." Julian jumped off the couch with sudden enthusiasm. "Jake needs photography tips." "You're always taking artistic photos. Teach him how to impress Tina with visual storytelling." Vic mitigated, then nodded solemnly. "I can share my perspective on capturing movement through still images." Roman consulted his spreadsheet. "Silas, you're showing promising progress with Meyer. Your studio sessions have increased in frequency and decreased in argumentative intensity." Silas scowled, which was his version of looking pleased. "Meyer and I have been texting, but it's all very intellectual. She sends me articles about music theory and independent artists I should be aware of. I respond with equally academic observations about production techniques." "That sounds promising," Roman noted. "Shared intellectual interests form solid relationship foundations." "Or it means I'm permanently friend-zoned through excessive intellectual discussion," Silas countered pessimistically. "When I tried to suggest a meeting, she sent me a link about the commercialization of coffee culture." "Maybe she's testing your depth," Vic suggested. "Seeing if you're interested in her perspective or just trying to impress her." "How can I tell the difference?" Silas asked, frustration in his voice. "Stop trying to impress her and just be interested," John advised. Ask questions because you want to know her answers, not because you think they're the right questions to ask. Easier said than done, Silas muttered, but he was taking notes on his phone. Have you tried smiling at her? John continued. People generally respond positively to facial expressions that don't suggest imminent homicide. My face functions adequately, Silas replied stiffly. Your face looks like you're contemplating where to bury the bodies, James pointed out. Show us your smile, John encouraged. Your friendly, non-threatening smile. Silas sighed deeply and made a pained grimace. His lips pulled back into a rictus that exposed too many teeth, while his eyes remained coldly analytical. The room collectively recoiled. That's terrifying, Julian whispered. Are you smiling or preparing to bite someone? James asked, concerned. This is why I don't smile, Silas muttered, his face returning to its natural impassive state. No, we can work with this, John insisted, sitting beside Silas. Smiling is a technical skill like anything else. It requires practice and proper technique. I refuse to practice smiling, Silas stated flatly. Think of it as facial choreography, John suggested. You wouldn't perform a new dance without rehearsing. Same principle. The members watched, fascinated and horrified, for the next 10 minutes as John attempted to coach Silas through various iterations of smiling, each seemingly more unsettling than the last. The last version, which John declared less serial killer, more mysterious artist, still looked vaguely threatening but was deemed an improvement. Remember, John instructed, in small doses. Don't maintain it for 3 seconds at a time, and always follow with a thoughtful nod, so she knows you're still serious about music. Silas nodded grimly, clearly plotting to ignore this advice entirely. Moving on, Roman redirected, consulting his tablet. Julian, your situation with Hope is unique. You both appear to have unlimited energy and enthusiasm, but haven't progressed beyond friendship, despite obvious compatibility. Julian bounced on the couch cushions, perpetually in motion. We're having so much fun. Yesterday, we had a spontaneous dance battle in a department store. Mall security asked us to leave, but the crowd loved it. Have you tried asking her on a formal date? Roman suggested. One with clear romantic intentions, rather than just shared activities? Julian's perpetual motion paused momentarily. I know. We often do things together. We're going skydiving next week. Adrenaline activities aren't necessarily romantic, James pointed out. You need quieter moments to connect on a deeper level. Quiet moments? Julian repeated, looking confused by the concept. Like sitting still. On purpose? Maybe she wants to experience you too, Vic suggested gently. Not just activities with you. What's the difference? Julian asked, genuinely confused. Conversation, John said. Quiet moments. Getting to know each other, without the distraction of constant activity. Julian looked terrified by this concept. But what if she gets bored? Then she's not the right person for you, James said. But you won't know unless you give her the chance to know the real you, not just the entertainer you. John, what about you and Saul? Julian asked, diverting attention away. Any progress in making the food critic laugh? John's confident expression faltered. Not exactly. I've employed increasingly sophisticated culinary humor, but her response remains clinical at best. Example? Silas requested. Yesterday, I presented her with a deconstructed bibimbap and said, I hope this dish will rise to the occasion. The room collectively groaned. She said the execution was technically proficient, but the presentation was unnecessarily theatrical, John admitted. Maybe food puns aren't the way to her heart, James suggested. But food is our common ground, John insisted. It's how we connect. Perhaps the connection can be through the food rather than jokes about it, Vic offered quietly. The emotion conveyed through flavor rather than words. John contemplated this, nodding slowly. That's brilliant, Vic. Thank you. Vic inclined his head in acknowledgement, then returned to his flower arrangement. Speaking of Vic, Roman continued, consulting his tablet, your situation with Sarah appears to be progressing through your unique communication style. The flower language and metaphorical dialogue seem to resonate with her. Vic looked up from his flower arrangement, seeming surprised to be called upon. Sarah and I have been working on the Animal Sanctuary project. She has convenient insights about implementation and sustainability. That's work, not dating, Silas pointed out. The line has become somewhat blurred, Vic admitted. We spend hours discussing the project, but our conversations drift into more personal territory. Philosophy, life goals, childhood experiences that shaped our perspectives on animal welfare. That sounds like emotional intimacy disguised as collaboration, Roman observed. Potentially more meaningful than traditional dating activities. But she maintains careful boundaries, Vic continued. No physical contact beyond professional handshakes. Meetings in public spaces. Everything could be interpreted as purely business if observed by others. Maybe she's protecting her reputation, James suggested. Dating an idol could complicate her position in the modeling industry. Or maybe she's being careful not to confuse business with personal feelings, John added. That's quite mature. Roman adjusted his glasses thoughtfully. Ellie and I have established a fascinating intellectual partnership. We discuss art, philosophy, and the intersection of aesthetic theory and practical application. Our conversations could last for hours if time permitted. But, Jake sensed hesitation. But they remain entirely cerebral, Roman admitted. No physical contact, minimal personal disclosure beyond academic interests. I'm beginning to wonder if she sees me as a colleague rather than a potential romantic partner. Have you given her any indication that you're interested in more than intellectual discussion? John asked. Roman looked uncomfortable. Not explicitly. I hoped that our mutual engagement would naturally evolve. Women aren't mind readers, Roman, James said gently. Even brilliant ones. If you want something beyond friendship, you have to communicate that somehow. Let's table my existential crisis for now, Roman suggested kindly. James, your turn. The twin situation is. James shifted uncomfortably. Muse and I are complicated. The twin situation created trust issues that we're still working through. She's incredibly understanding about it, but there's a careful distance now that wasn't there before. Distance how? Julian asked. She's friendly, engaging, clearly enjoys our conversations, but she maintains boundaries that didn't exist before she found out about Evan, James explained. Like she's protecting herself from being deceived again. Can you blame her? Silas asked bluntly. You had your brother impersonate you on a date. That's next-level deception. I know, James said quietly. I'm trying to rebuild trust, but it's slow going. She needs to see consistent honesty over time, not just apologies. Time and consistency, Vic nodded. The only way to rebuild damaged trust. That leaves me, John said. Saul and I have developed what I think is a genuine friendship. She's even started smiling occasionally, which I consider a major victory. But, Roman prompted. But I can't tell if she sees me as friend material or just tolerates me because I provide interesting culinary discussions, John admitted. She's reserved, guarded, and gives absolutely no romantic signals that I can detect. Maybe that's good, Jake suggested. No pressure, no expectations. Or maybe I'm completely in the friend zone and too optimistic to recognize it, John countered. They all sat in thoughtful silence, the weight of their shared romantic inexperience settling over the room like fog. "Alas," John said finally, "we're all completely hopeless." "Statistically speaking, yes," Roman confirmed, consulting his tablet. "Based on current trajectories, we have approximately a 12% chance of successful romantic progression." "That's terrifying," James observed. "But also kind of liberating," Julian added. "If we fail through overthinking, maybe we should try not thinking instead?" "How does one not think?" Roman asked with academic curiosity. "I have no idea," James admitted. "But thinking isn't working. We need to learn how not to analyze every action," Vic concluded. "That sounds impossible," Silas said. "More impossible than our current 12% success rate?" John challenged. The room fell silent as they contemplated this mathematical reality. "Hypothetically speaking," Jake said finally, "how would we learn not to overthink?" "Practice," Julian suggested. "Practice what exactly?" Roman asked. "Dating things," James replied vaguely. "Romantic things. All the things we have no idea how to do. Like conversation that flows like a river, knowing when to make a move, physical affection that isn't awkward." John enumerated. "Oh," Julian said, understanding dawning. "You mean we need to practice dating? With each other?" Jake asked, horrified. "Emergency romantic education," John confirmed, warming to the idea. "Practice scenarios. Controlled environment." "That's either brilliant or the worst idea anyone's ever had," Vic observed. "Probably both," Roman agreed. "But our current approach has a 12% success rate." A comfortable silence fell as each member contemplated their Cupid situations. Despite the teasing and advice-giving, there was something supportive about these late-night sessions, which created a safe space to acknowledge vulnerabilities that would never be exposed in their professional lives. The wall clock was pointing to midnight. "Now," John suggested, his voice carrying the determination of someone about making a spectacularly questionable decision. "Now," they agreed unanimously, sealing their fate with the kind of confidence that only comes from complete desperation. Julian was already bouncing toward the kitchen. "I'll get supplies." "What kind of supplies?" Jake called after him, though he was afraid to hear the answer. "You'll see." Julian's voice echoed back, followed by the sound of cabinets opening and closing with alarming enthusiasm. Roman was frantically typing notes on his tablet. "We need structure. Methodology. A systematic approach to romantic skill acquisition." "We need help," Silas interrupted, watching Julian return with an armload of mysterious items. "Professional help." "Too late for that," James muttered, staring at what appeared to be fruit in Julian's arms. "We're doing this, aren't we?" "Emergency romantic education," John confirmed with the faint tremor of someone who suspected they were about to cross a line they could never uncross. "How hard could it be?" "Wait," Roman said, holding up his hand as Julian approached the coffee table. "Before we get to whatever Julian has planned, shouldn't we start with the basics?" "What basics?" Jake asked nervously. "Dating rituals," Roman said, consulting his tablet. "The established behaviors that signal romantic interest. Things men do when they want a woman to know they're interested, and how women typically respond to those signals." "Oh," Vic said thoughtfully. "You mean like actual courtship protocols that people understand instinctively?" "Exactly," John nodded. "We can't jump straight to physical contact when we don't even know the proper sequence of romantic gestures that come before it." Julian deflated slightly, still clutching his fruit collection. "No kissing practice yet?" "Let's work our way up to that particular nightmare," James said gently. "Fine," Julian sighed, setting the fruit aside temporarily. "But I'm keeping these for later." "Noted," John said dryly. "Now what should we practice first?" Everyone turned to see Dan, their building's security guard, who had arrived for his routine late-night check. He stood in the doorway, taking in the sight of 7 famous idols discussing basic human interaction at nearly 1 a.m. "Oh," John said weakly. "Hi, Dan." "Don't mind me," Dan said, closing the door behind him. "Continue with your, what exactly are you doing?" Julian announced cheerfully. "We're terrible at dating." Dan's weathered face showed a mixture of amusement and sympathy. "I can see that. Mind if I offer some advice? I've been married for 23 years. 7 faces turned toward him with desperate hope. "Please," James said. "We're hopeless." Dan removed his cap and settled into a chair, committed to helping. "First lesson, stop thinking so much. You're treating every interaction like a test you can pass or fail." "But what if we say the wrong thing?" Silas asked. "Then you say the wrong thing," Dan shrugged. "Real people do that all the time. The goal isn't perfection, it's connection." For the next 30 minutes, Dan guided them through conversations without scripts, focusing on listening rather than planning responses, on being comfortable with silence, and on recognizing that awkward moments were everyday rather than catastrophic failures. "Better," Dan said finally, observing their slightly more natural interactions. "Now, what's with the produce Julian's been guarding?" Julian's face lit up as he retrieved his harvest. "This is where it gets interesting." Julian deposited his fruit collection on the coffee table with a theatrical flourish. Apples, peaches, oranges, and what appeared to be a particularly unfortunate banana. "Behold," he announced, "our practice partners." 6 pairs of eyes stared at the fruit, with the collective expression of men contemplating their life choices. "This is insane," Jake muttered, though he was already reaching for his camera to document what was going to be either their greatest triumph or most spectacular failure. "Insanity is doing the same thing repeatedly and expecting different results," Roman pointed out, consulting his tablet. "Our current approach has a 12% success rate. Statistically, almost any alternative represents improvement." "Even this?" Vic gestured vaguely at the fruit display, his usual philosophical demeanor cracking slightly. "Especially this," Julian declared with the confidence of someone who had never encountered a bad idea he couldn't enthusiastically embrace. "Think about it. Controlled environment, no judgment, unlimited practice opportunities." "The fruit won't judge us," Silas agreed slowly, "because fruit lacks consciousness." "Exactly." Julian beamed. "It's perfect." The 7 members stood around the coffee table in a circle, like disciples gathering around some particularly questionable altar, studying their inanimate teachers with newfound respect and terror. "So," John said finally, breaking the contemplative silence, "who goes first?" The collective step backward was immediate and synchronized, as if choreographed. "Rock, paper, scissors?" Jake suggested weakly. "That seems like the kind of decision we'll regret in the morning," James observed. "We're going to regret all of this in the morning," Silas pointed out. "Might as well embrace the full catastrophe." Dan looked from the desperate faces of 7 superstars to the innocent fruit arrangement and back again. A slow smile began to spread across his weathered features. "You know what," he said. "I've seen stranger things in this building, and at least this is constructive." He paused. "Sort of." "Dan, you're our relationship guru now," Julian declared. "Teach us the proper technique." The security guard looked torn between amusement and a hint of second-hand embarrassment. "I'm not sure this is." "Please?" Julian asked. "We have no one else to ask. Manager Kando would have a heart attack if we mentioned this, and Director Blake would probably schedule us for extra dance practice to redirect our energy." Dan sighed, the resigned sound of a man who had witnessed too many idle antics to be surprised anymore. "Fine. But I'm only giving verbal guidance. The fruit is your responsibility. What followed was perhaps the most absurd training session in C7's history. Under Dan's increasingly uncomfortable instruction, 7 idols practiced approaching, angling, and ultimately contacting various fruits, each member applying their characteristic intensity to the task. Silas's approach was clinical and precise, as if the peach were a particularly challenging musical arrangement. Roman analyzed every instruction with scholarly thoroughness, occasionally pausing to take notes. Jake filmed his attempts from multiple angles and reviewed the footage with critical focus. Vic seemed to be having a deeply metaphorical conversation with his fruit that no one else could hear. Julian attacked his apple with characteristic enthusiasm, but no finesse. John approached the exercise with the same careful consideration he applied to cooking, focusing on technique and timing. Remember, Dan instructed, fully committed to his unexpected role as kissing coach, it's about feelings, not thoughts. You're not trying to impress. The fruit doesn't seem very receptive to my communication, Roman observed, inspecting his peach with scientific interest. Mine keeps rolling away, Julian complained as his apple escaped for the 3rd time. Is that symbolic? Probably, James laughed, watching his bandmate chase the fruit across the floor. The absurd practice session was at its peak. Julian dramatically dipped his recaptured apple, while Jake provided K-drama-style commentary, when the dorm door opened without warning. Manager Kando stepped in, arms full of schedules and planning documents, mouth open to deliver some administrative announcements. He froze, taking in the unprecedented scene. 7 idol superstars, engaged in what appeared to be intimate interactions with various fruits, under the guidance of their stoic security guard. What, Manager Kando finally managed, his voice strangled, is happening here? 7 pairs of eyes stared at him like startled deer, fruits held in various compromising positions. Midnight snack? John offered weakly. Nutritional assessment? Roman attempted. Performance art? Vic suggested with uncharacteristic quickness. Kissing practice? Julian cheerfully announced, immune as always to social awkwardness. Dan is teaching us because he's been married for 20 years and knows all about relationships, and we need to learn for our dating project and… Julian, 6 voices chorused in alarm. It was too late. Manager Kando's expression progressed through a fascinating array of emotions: confusion, realization, horror, and finally something approaching an existential crisis. Dating project, he repeated faintly, documents slipping from his grasp to scatter across the floor. It's not what it looks like, James began, then reconsidered. It's exactly what it looks like, but with context it's less strange than it appears. 23 years in entertainment management, Manager Kando murmured, seemingly to himself. I've handled drunk idols, dating scandals, and international incidents. But this… He gestured weakly at the fruit-holding members. This is where I draw the line. We can explain, John attempted. Manager Kando held up a hand. No. No explanations. I will leave this room, walk around the building, and return in 15 minutes. When I return, there will be no fruit, no kissing practice, and no evidence that this has ever occurred. Are we clear? 7 heads nodded in unison. Dan, Manager Kando turned to the security guard, betrayal evident in his voice. I expected better from you. Dan shrugged, unrepentant. Someone had to help these kids. They're hopeless. Manager Kando closed his eyes briefly, visibly counting to 10. Without another word, he turned and exited, shut the door with exaggerated gentleness, somehow more concerning than if he had slammed it. The moment he left, 7 idols and 1 security guard burst into uncontrollable laughter, the absurdity of the situation finally breaking through their practiced composure. They laughed until their sides hurt, gasping for breath between fresh waves of hysteria whenever someone managed to say fruit or kissing practice. His face, Julian wheezed, tears streaming down his cheeks. I've never seen anyone look so betrayed by a peach. We're never going to live this down, John predicted, still chuckling as he gathered the discarded fruit. He's going to bring up the fruit incident at every contract negotiation for the rest of our careers. Worth it, Jake declared, reviewing the footage he had somehow captured of Manager Kando's expression. This is art. Dan checked his watch as they hastily cleared the evidence of their unorthodox training session. My rounds are overdue. For what it's worth, he added, pausing at the door, you're all on the right track. Not with the fruit, that was ridiculous, but with growing beyond your idle personas. Thanks, Dan, John said sincerely. For everything. The security guard nodded, his usual stoic expression returning. Just promise me one thing. What's that? James asked. When you eventually have real first kisses with your girls, leave the fruit out of it, Dan advised solemnly. Trust me on this. With that parting wisdom, he left them to deal with the imminent return of their traumatized manager. When Manager Kando returned 15 minutes later, 7 men, innocently seated, were engaged in a relaxing late-night conversation. If their barely suppressed smiles and occasionally suspicious coughs suggested otherwise, he chose not to acknowledge it. Through years of experience in artist management, Manager Kando had learned that some things were better left uninvestigated. Whatever dating project they had undertaken, despite his explicit guidelines about discretion and appropriate behavior, would presumably reveal itself in time. For now, he would file the fruit incident in the ever-growing mental folder labeled C7 Mysteries, and focus on the comeback preparations that were ostensibly the purpose of his late-night visit. In the following weeks, if they occasionally dissolved into inexplicable laughter whenever anyone mentioned fruit, Manager Kando wisely chose not to ask why.